Hello and welcome back to Everard Junction. In today's video I thought it would be a good idea to do a layout update, as I've done various small jobs in various sections of the layout. I've completed quite a large project that didn't take very long to do, but it's made a massive difference to the just general appearance and professionalism of the layout, so I'll show you that. There's a couple of bits and bobs with the rolling stock, but generally, as it's obviously been summer, we're drawing to the close of the summer now, obviously it's been quite hot up here at various times, and I've been out and about doing other stuff, so it's taken a while to make some of the progress, but I'm pleased anyway with what we've managed to get done. After this video, I shall be doing a layout tour video. Lots of people have been requesting a tour of the layout over the last 6 months, and I'll agree, quite a lot has changed on it since I did the last tour in 2021. With regards to the previous video, thank you very much for all of your comments and input on that one. It seemed to go down pretty well. I know the scrapyard's quite a popular topic with regards to this layout, so it was nice for me to make another video about the scrapyard, and also really nice to rework certain parts of it. A couple of people were confused with regards to why perhaps I might go and rework a scene that in their eyes is complete, that's finished, when there's other sections of the layout that need my attention. The answer to that is very simple. A model railway is something that you do because you enjoy it, and I think it's important to do certain jobs and certain tasks that sort of rekindle your excitement and enthusiasm for the layout. If you constantly slog it out doing all the big important jobs, then after a while you will get burnt out, and you will become tired of your layout, and you'll find yourself visiting it less and less. So looking over at the scrapyard, which I reworked in a previous video, you can see I've done something that I've been meaning to do for a long time, and that is to paint the fascia boards black. This has made the layout look a lot more professional and just sort of tied everything together. This is a job that I'd been putting off for a long time, as I needed to tie in the edge of the board to all of my existing scenery. But that's something I've now done, and as you can see, just having a bit of black paint on the timber on the face of the layout really just helps with the way it looks. It makes things a lot easier for filming, and if I get the edge of the layout in frame now, it doesn't look quite so bad as just a load of exposed plywood. As you can imagine, this was quite a lengthy process, and I had to do various little bits of scenery work along the edge of the layout just to tie things back together. You can see we've got some glue and some stuff still drying in a few places, so if you see any white blobs of glue, just excuse that for the time being. It will of course dry over the coming days. So let's take a look at the countryside section of the layout, and I'll just talk you through the various improvements and additions I've made to it. I've not really worked on it very much over the last year or so, and it really showed, and it just generally needed some extra detail and a little bit of maintenance here and there. So starting at the far end, I've made a few sort of weathering improvements and bits and pieces. So you can see the pathway around here, it's changed colour slightly. The same goes for the farm track here. Still got all the same detail to it, but you can see it's sort of lightened up a little bit. It was all rather sort of earthy brown, and the intention was to sort of add some extra painting effects to it and bits like that. To do that, I've been using the Tamiya Weathering Master weathering powder sets. These are very good. I've got various weathering powders and I tend to get on really well with these Tamiya ones. I've got a few different types, and the most prominent ones I use are set A and set B. So using a nasty old paintbrush that was destined for the bin, I've just gone around with the weathering powder and just changed the tones and sort of tried to lighten it up a little bit, give it a little bit more of a sort of dried out look, as the layout is set during the summertime. But you can certainly see where the rain has been and how the ground has been carved up by those vehicles. Down here on the path around the field, it's a similar story, and I've just sort of tried to dry things out and make things look a little bit better. In the corner of the field, I've added a small cut through where, you know, people are lazy, they don't want to walk all the way around the corner, so they've just cut across the field, something you quite often see in real life. And a popular comment in the video where I built this section. Of course, that was always going to be added at some point, but you know, you can only do so much in a given video. It's important to remember when you watch videos of, say, this layout or anybody else's, to bear in mind that what you're seeing in most cases isn't actually finished, and whoever's built the layout and made the video probably has various plans and intentions to take things further. Over on the far side, I've made a couple of additions in terms of a little bit of gravel to sort of mimic a path or some sort of track of sorts running down to the equipment platform there with the various relay boxes on it. And I've also added a few sort of bushes and small plants and things here and there. A little bit of tidying up with the weathering with regards to the track, and just generally just sort of given the area a much needed bit of maintenance. Over on this section, I've done a little bit of additional ballasting here. All of this track here was dug up on these two lines when I realigned the fiddle yard. If you've been watching me for a while, you might remember last year I rebuilt the fiddle yard, which is the storage area for all the trains at the back of the layout. I rebuilt all of that, and part of that meant that some of the track work coming onto the scenic section had to be ripped up. Never did get around to reballasting it, so I've tidied all of that up and just weathered it and blended all the paintwork back in, and so far everything seems to be working well. Moving a little bit further down the scene, I've done a little bit of work with some brick plasticard and added some various shrubs and bushes and things like that. Quite a bit of this is still wet and still a work in progress, and it will be improved obviously in due course. So basically what we have here is the branch line running underneath the main portion of the layout through this plate girder bridge, and then over the back there you can see how it sort of continues and goes off seam. This was just all bare plywood previously. What I've done now is done a little bit of work with some brick plasticard, which is currently still a work in progress. I haven't done any weathering to that yet, but basically what we have there is the entrance to a proper tunnel, and then we have the plate girder bridge just over the entrance to it. A little bit of a strange configuration, but if you look hard enough, it does exist in real life, especially in places like London. And at the end of the day, I'm extremely limited for space. I know it looks like quite a big railway on camera looking at all of this, but really there isn't very much room. So for me, I felt it was important to just get something in there that looks neat and professional and sort of ties things together, and whether or not it's actually 100% realistic and accurate, we'll leave that for another discussion another time. Sometimes you have to compromise just to make things work, and I'm quite happy with the overall visual effect of that. Obviously I would have liked to put the tunnel further back, but then it would have meant it was right up against the back scene, and you just end up with making compromises somewhere else. So whilst it needs a bit of extra work, I'm quite happy with how that's looking, and we'll do a little bit more work on it hopefully by the next update. Something else I've also done is I have tied the baseboard that's on this side into the track. I've done all the necessary ballasting, I've added all of the cable troughing, and I've also added lots of bits of sort of trees, small trees and shrubs and things like that to create a sort of dense hedgerow that will be at the back of what will eventually become the gardens for these houses. Again, that's quite typical for houses that back onto a railway line. Of course, you'll have a garden fence of some description, but generally speaking, at the bottom of the garden, there'll be quite a lot of sort of trees and shrubs and things like that growing between the railway line and the properties. That was quite a big job, laying all the cable troughing, doing all of the various sculpt mould and filler work to tie everything together, not to mention gluing in and building all of the shrubs and bushes But really pleased with the overall effect of that, and it's nice now that the far side of the layout there is starting to look a little bit more tied in to the rest of the stuff that I built a couple of years ago over on this side. The buildings themselves are a scratch build, very much still a work in progress, and one day I'll get around to finishing them. It's just one of those jobs that sort of started and never quite got around to finishing. But now we've got some beginnings of sort of scenery on this side, I think there'll be a bit more motivation to carry on with this section. Looking down in this section, I've also done a few more improvements, changes and additions. So the track here is sitting on a piece of plywood, a 12mm piece of plywood that I cut probably about this wide into a nice long curve, so that the track was really well supported as it goes into the inaccessible section of the layout just there. Either side of that there was just a gaping hole between the retaining wall on both sides of the bridge, and I basically avoided doing anything with it because most of the time you tended not to notice it. Now what I've done is I've put some sculptor mould and some filler into that gap and just sealed everything up, applied some ballast, done a bit of weathering, and I've also added a little relay box down there just to give an extra little bit of detail to go along with that cable troughing. A small job, but little bits like this really make a difference, and if you can knock out 10 or 12 of those little jobs over the course of a weekend, it really makes a big improvement to the overall appearance of the layout. It can be hard to sort of show what I'm trying to explain with the camera, but again, hopefully you can just sort of see through the tunnel just there, or through the bridge rather, the appearance of the tunnel on the far side. You can see by doing all those little jobs, by adding the trees and bushes and shrubs, improvements to the ballast and filling in any gaps and holes, as well as a little bit of plausible brickwork over behind the plate girder bridge. It just sort of lends to the authenticity of the scene, makes things look a little bit more plausible, and it's just nice to look at when just enjoying the layout and running the trains. You don't find yourself constantly looking at that hole or that bare piece of plywood and thinking, oh, I really need to get that sorted. It's just one of those jobs I've been putting off for quite a while. Hopefully here you can pick out the weathering on the pathway that runs around the field. As I say, just a subtle little job, a little change, but it really makes a difference, and it just lifts the whole area, makes it look a little bit more professional. Over here in the valley between the tracks, I've added a few extra plants and things like that, just a small splash of colour for the scene. And you can see over on this section, I've done a little bit of extra ground cover over on the left-hand side, just along here, to tie that into those black fascia boards. And I've also finally added a relay box to this small section, and just done a little bit of general sort of weathering and stuff here, there, and everywhere. Moving further round, I have done a bit of painting to this bit of ground cover here. I still haven't actually decided exactly what I'm going to put in this section, but this forms part of the small industrial estate that runs around towards the town scene. That was done just so I can tie everything into the fascia boards and paint everything. I just used some matte black paint and a small 6-inch paint roller. Just went around the whole layout once I'd made sure I'd sealed any gaps and got everything sitting nicely in position, and really pleased with how that's turned out. It just looks a lot better, and now it's a little bit easier to film and I don't have to worry about the baseboard edge quite so much being visible in shot. Another relatively boring job I've done over on this side is replace the fluorescent tubes with LEDs in both lights on this section of the layout. So gradually, slowly working my way around the whole room and changing everything over to LED. The lighting is certainly better up here, and of course it uses considerably less energy. A relatively expensive job. It's surprising how much those LED tubes cost, but I spend a lot of time up here, do a lot of work, have done a lot of work, and it's important that you can see it properly. So pleased with that, and I think I've only got 2 or 3 lights up here now that are still rocking the fluorescent tubes. So in time, everything will get changed over to LED. Moving further around, I've done a small bit of ground cover just in this section to tie in those steps and bed the signal into position. Still a work in progress, that's all still drying, but we'll add some extra bits and pieces and make that look a little bit more professional in due course. But once again, it's just another small job that I wanted to get out of the way. During the last video, I touched on the ground cover in the industrial estate area, and you saw me do a bit of that work and sort of making things look a little bit more run down and a little bit more realistic. Well, I've now extended all of those painting and weathering effects right the way through, all the way to the end of the industrial estate, and quite pleased with the overall appearance. It certainly looks better than how it did before. I think we need some subtle airbrushing and a bit of weathering in a few places, maybe a little bit of plant growth, but generally speaking, quite happy with that. There's a good example there in the commercial garage, just a nice sort of ruined surface just there, very much like what you'd expect to see in a place like this. As I say, some extra weathering, a few oil leaks and things like that I think wouldn't go amiss, and then we can focus on the various details that need to go in this section, as well as some sort of interior and lighting for the main workshop. Over on the street scene, not a massive amount has changed, but I have started construction on a new building. Working on urban scenes like this takes an extraordinary amount of time, so it will always be slow going over on this section of the layout, but I have started working on a building to put in this section here. It was always going to be a bit tough as to what to do. In one mind, I really like the sort of open view that we've got, say, now, where you can look right through and see the track and where the cars are going and all that sort of stuff. But on the other hand, the sort of area that I'm modelling, sort of out towards sort of Reading, Slough, Maidenhead, that sort of neck of the woods, it usually, certainly around the railway station, is quite heavily built up. And I think it would also look really good if there was a building here and you had a little bit more of a restricted view, but it gives you that sense of sort of concrete jungle. So as much as it's tempting to put something like a market or something relatively flat like a war memorial or something like that, or a playing field, it generally probably wouldn't be seen in an area like this. So what I've decided to do is to go with a two-storey building, just to sort of fill this area in, and it will go in position something a little bit like that. So this building will eventually become a restaurant. Haven't exactly decided what I'm going to go for just yet. It is based on a real building in the London area, and I've just sort of used various cues and ideas from it. But you can see, you can still enjoy the trains running. I've put some quite large windows in it, so you can still see stuff going past the building around the back where the street is, and I think it really complements some of the other buildings that we have here in this built-up section. I think it would have looked a little bit strange to have these large buildings on the right-hand side and then just sort of nothing on the left and a field or something relatively flat. Chances are they would have developed on it and built another building. Obviously it's not finished yet, it's missing a roof and things like that, but hopefully you sort of get the idea for what I was going for here. I really like the idea of these streets sort of hemmed in by buildings and having to sort of peer around stuff and look up the streets and look through windows and things like that. At the end of the day, if you do want to just see the trains, you can come up to a viewpoint like this. You've got no trouble, you can just look over the top of everything, which is one of the reasons why I put the railway on an elevated section. So I'm looking forward to getting the building finished. Obviously there's a fair bit of work left to do. I haven't made a video on this one. You've seen me build a few buildings now. They all follow roughly the same process, so I'd rather just get it finished. In this section along here, there'll be some additional buildings, different styles, heights, architecture, just to, again, give you that sense of a busy, built-up town. And I think that could work quite well in this area. Moving further around, I haven't done too much over on this scene, just general maintenance and the odd bit of painting here and there, just to just sort of make sure everything's okay. I did a huge amount of work in this area this year, both with the station and with the shops and the street. None of this existed at the beginning of the year, so it's been nice to take a bit of a break from it and just enjoy what I have managed to do. So it's been good, for example, to go over to the countryside section and make a bit more progress over there. I can sort of leave this bit and come back to it when the enthusiasm returns. And the same, of course, goes for over on the station itself and the surrounding car park. Huge amount of work done over the last year or so, and with it being an urban scene, it just takes absolutely ages to make any progress. There's so many details and so many things to consider, it takes a very, very long time. If you want to build a model railway and time is of the essence, you haven't got a lot of free time, you just want to get something done, then trust me, build countryside, build that green and pleasant land that so many of us have built with model railways. I'm being honest, with a bit of experience and a few skills under your belt, you can knock up a large countryside section with lots of trees and bushes and stuff over a couple of months. It doesn't really take that long. If you want to build stuff like this, it's a long haul job. It just takes so long. And again, that's one of the reasons for the lack of videos, say, with regards to the station or the town scene. I can only do what I can do in my free time, and yeah, urban environment, as much as I love the way it looks, Christ, does it take a long time to build. Moving on to rolling stock, I haven't got a massive amount to report. As I've mentioned several times, I model the era and the region quite strictly, so I tend not to add massive amounts of new rolling stock to the layout, which is a good thing because it certainly costs a lot of money. So the first thing I've done is fit a new motor to my Hornby Class 56. It's had a lot of use. The motor was well and truly knackered, and I picked up another one and swapped it out. Wasn't too difficult to do, and this is now running properly again. So this particular model of 049 will always be quite special to me, as it was my first proper purchase for the original Everard Junction, and despite the new Class 56 on the horizon from Cavalex models, I think this will still have a place on the layout. Interested in picking up one of those, but I'll reserve judgment until they actually exist. In other news, my Bachmann Class 205 thumper has been putting in really quite good work on the layout. If you're interested, I did a whole video on adding that middle car to this unit to make it a 3-car train instead of a 2-car train. It's been working really well. I use it all the time, and very, very pleased with it. And I'm pleased to report my cut and shut centre coach is still holding strong and hasn't shown any signs of deteriorating, despite the various temperature changes and humidity changes up here in the attic. Sticking with multiple units, this is my Bachmann Class 101. When I purchased this model originally, years ago now, probably 2013, it was blue and grey. I repainted it into Network Southeast at one point, and it wasn't bad. It was, it was okay. One of my better jobs. But I was browsing the Bachmann Spares website, and they were selling the Network Southeast body shell for the Class 101, and obviously that's finished to a higher standard than what I could ever hope to achieve here with an airbrush and some pots of paint. So I purchased a replacement body for the existing chassis, and as you can see, it looks very crisp and very sharp. Really pleased with that. Obviously it needs a little bit of weathering and toning down, so that'll be a job for the future. Obviously the chassis is already weathered, as that was on the previous body shell, but yeah, generally speaking, quite happy with that change to my Class 101. Just little things like this can really help spice up the layout. Change your body shell, change a colour, change this, change that. You don't necessarily need to keep going out to the shop and buying something new. On the subject of something new, I do have a couple of Class 31s on order from Acura Scale, and I'm really looking forward to those arriving. This example behind the 56 is my only example of a Class 31 on the layout. They were quite common in the region and the era that I model, but I've only ever had one in the collection. The only reason I've got one in the collection is because getting one can be quite difficult. Hornby don't release these very often, if at all, and many of the earlier examples are plagued with mazoc rot in the chassis. I was lucky. This is one of the few earlier ones that doesn't suffer from that. The body shell is a complete repaint. It used to be British Rail Blue, and again, it's a nice model. It does the job. I quite like it, but once again, if you're new to the hobby and you want one of these, you have to wait perhaps 5 or 6 years for Hornby to get the one you're interested in into the shops. They seem to be very, very slow with getting stuff to market, and I think that's where they've lost an awful lot of their market share to competitors. It's just not having the product they offer in the shops. Over on the workbench, I've got a few weathering projects lined up. At the back, we've got a Class 58, which I purchased second-hand from a friend. In the middle, we've got a Class 33, which I again purchased second-hand. And here we have an existing model I already had, but I put another body on it from Bachmann Spares. This was originally a Class 47 in Intercity livery called Firefly, and I changed the appropriate parts of the chassis and swapped this body shell so that it became a petroleum sector Class 47, which goes really nicely with the various petroleum oil trains that I've got in the fiddle yard. So I'll probably get all of those weathered at the same time, and of course I'll make a video on it. I really enjoy the weathering projects. It's obviously a little bit more specialist, and not so many of you are perhaps interested in that side of things, but I always enjoy the process, and I enjoy making the videos about it, making the railway look a little bit more realistic, more convincing, more authentic to the time period, rather than just having everything pristine and straight out of the box. Something else I've also been slowly working on in terms of rolling stock is my Pullman train. This is my sort of heritage sort of train, if you like, and it's loosely based on the Pullman rail set that was doing the rounds in the 1980s behind various heritage locomotives. The real train had a Mark I brake at either end. The rest of the train was then made up of Pullman second parlour cars, and occasionally the bar car that you can see here, the Hadrian bar, would make an appearance, and if it wasn't available then it would be just substituted for a regular Mark I buffet. So I've been slowly picking up various Pullman cars, mostly second parlours, making sure I try and get a different running number each time, and adding those to the rake. I previously had some other Pullmans in this rake and they weren't quite right in terms of authenticity, so we're just slowly sort of making this train look a little bit better. The Mark 1s would have been a different livery to this. They were a very specific livery. The only model I'm aware of was a Bachmann Collectors Club exclusive many years ago. It's like hen's teeth, you'll never find it for sale, and they only did one when the real train had one at either end, so you'd need two coaches with different running numbers. Very hard to get hold of that. I'm not massively bothered about picking one up, to be honest. Life's too short. But I'm pleased with the overall appearance of the train, and it's just nice to have something to run behind some of the heritage diesels and the odd steam loco. With regards to the rest of the rolling stock, it's mostly unchanged. I just do a little bit of weathering and a bit of painting here and there, general maintenance and stuff like that. I have sold a couple of bits and pieces that I don't tend to use very much, and that's been nice to just recoup a bit of money out of that, especially as I got a fair bit more for it than what I originally paid for it 10 or so years ago. So that was nice. But yeah, generally speaking, I tend not to buy very much in terms of rolling stock for the layout. I feel I have quite a good representation of what was running in the Western region during the late 1980s. So I take a little bit more of a careful and considered approach now. In terms of future models, I have a couple of 31s on order from Acura Scale. I am genuinely looking forward to those, as Hornby have sort of starved us of Class 31s over the last decade. Not been particularly easy to get various models in certain colours, hence why I've only got one. And I've also got, I think, 250s on order from Acura Scale. Once again, a similar story with the Hornby model. Not that much wrong with it, a nice representation of the class, barring a few inaccuracies around the cab and the windscreens. But generally speaking, once again, they don't release them very often, especially in the more popular colours. Currently I have one 31 and one Class 50, so I expect those will probably get replaced by the Acura Scale offerings. I have some Mark II coaches on order from Acura Scale, which I'm hoping will complement my existing rakes of Mark II coaches from Bachmann. It'd be nice to have some Mark IIs in different varieties, such as the Mark IIB and the Mark IIC. Yeah, looking forward to those, but as I say, not massive amount of stuff on order or in the pipeline, as generally speaking I think I've got a nice representation of what ran during this region and era. I don't feel the need to keep adding stuff all the time. You can also see my fiddle yard's pretty much rammed full to capacity, so once again, storage and stuff like that. If I don't feel I'm going to get the use out of it, I tend not to order it at all. So there we go, that'll bring this update to a close. As you can see, just general bits and bobs around the layout, but not a massive amount to report. It's nice sometimes just to switch the camera off and just do a few odd jobs and make some improvements to the scenery. Filming everything really adds to the length of the build. So with the hot weather recently, it was just nice just to crack on with a few little projects and make some improvements and get on with some stuff that I'd been putting off for a long time. This countryside section, I'm quite pleased with the progress. I think it's looking a lot better than it did previously. Of course, there's still more to do, but we'll get round to that in due course. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back as always as soon as I can with the next video, but obviously it does take a long time to make progress, so I'll do what I can. In the next video we'll do a layout tour, and I'll also film a running session of some description as well.